So my name is Kira Marie Peter Hansen, to take the full name, and I'm a Danish member of the European Parliament for the Greens EFA group.
So what does your day look like as an MEP?
There are no 2 days that I like, but normally we start with a morning meeting with my whole team, discussing what is the press discussing today, which stories take up a lot of space for people, and is there anything we should react to? And then it's normally either doing some interviews or visitor groups coming from different countries, negotiation meetings, reading a lot of emails. That's a lot of my job as well, and staying on top of what is going on in the EU.
From your beginnings working as a barista in Copenhagen, what issue made you politically active in the beginning, I guess?
Well, I became a member of my youth party back in 2015. 2014, 2015, and I'm not sure what exactly it was. I remember moving from the Social Democrats to the Greens because of the refugee crisis, 2015. You know, the Danish Social Democrats are a bit different than the rest of Europe's Social Democrats when it comes to immigration and refugees. So that was what made me go into politics.
Were you involved in any other youth organizations, or how did youth work play a role in making you become politically active?
I was also involved in the student movement when I was at my high school. So I did that for a long time. I was in the board of my organization, representing the different high school students in Denmark. So I had both that part and then the youth politics, where I was engaged both locally and then later on the national level.
So as the youngest MEP, do you ever feel like the political system is welcoming to young people, and why do you think so few young people are elected?
Well, I think overall the system is welcoming, and the people are welcoming. I think it's a nice place to be a young politician overall, and I think that counts across the political spectrum. Of course, you can still meet prejudice and people thinking you're an intern when you're not, and these kind of things. But I think overall also because Brussels is such a young city and a lot of the people who work in the European institutions are quite young, it's a very nice environment. Then I think regarding why we don't have more young MEPs, I think that there are different reasons. I think one of them is that in many parties and member states, they are not used to promoting young candidates. In my party, we had this rule that number 5 on the list always have to be the youth candidate. So kind of setting strict rules promoting youth candidates, I think is important to get there. And then perhaps as well that the traveling, we don't have maternity and paternity leave, so it's not the best place to be if you want to have a family life where you see each other a lot, unless you have a partner that wants to move, but not everyone does. So I think these two are the different reasons why we unfortunately don't see that many young MEPs.
So you when you were elected at 21, you committed to bringing more young people into politics through social media, visiting schools and bringing young people on visits. What did you learn from these experiences engaging with more young people?
Well, I think that I learned that young people are engaged. I think what we sometimes do is we talk about the institutions very much and very little about the politics. So also in high schools, we learn about there's the commission, the parliament, the council, which is just a bit boring. And I think that also gives the feeling that young people don't want to be involved in European politics because it's so institutionalized. But I think when we just discuss what do you think about climate policies, refugee policies, taxation, then you can see that young people actually have an opinion and want to be engaged. And I think we've also seen that the youth organizations are better at working across borders. So of course, Fridays for Future is one example where we saw young people from all over Europe and all over the world engaging to change politics. So I think I've learned that young people want to be part of shaping the future.
And coming back to this maybe issue that there isn't a lot of representation of young people at the European level, we see that only 6 MEPs in the European Parliament are under the age of 30. So how do you think that young people are adequately represented in the European Parliament, or how can we better represent young people?
I don't think we are. Like if you look just at the population of the European Union and then the elected representative, there is a mismatch. Of course, then you can also represent people who are not the exact same age of you, but the experience we have as young people count, like young people growing up in an educational system that are changing massively post-war, like in post the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah.
That's right. So we have different experiences as a young generation that are unfortunately not very well represented. There are a lot of youth organizations also in Europe that try to bring in young voices in the decision-making table. And I think they're doing a great job. We still have some structures that are making it difficult. We had also last year the European Year of Youth, and it's of course easy to invite a lot of young people to do nice speeches. And we see that also in the UN, then all of the young people do speeches, but then they're kicked out when the actual negotiations start. So there are still some issues there.
What role do you see young people playing in shaping the future of the EU?
Well, I think on like a legislative level, something that I hope we can one day have, and that the European Youth Forum also calls for, is to do like youth mainstreaming of the legislation. So seeing how will the different legislation that we do impact the young generation. I think that's very important. We do it also on gender, for example, and we do it for SMEs and for the climate. So I think doing it for young people makes sense. And then I hope as well that young people, like at a national level, will take part in forming how their government and how the European discussions are going to be. Because I think we have a different perspective. Of course, young people also disagree internally, but we have a different perspective on the world still.
How do you think the EU impacts the lives of young people through either the programs or the policies that the EU implements? And what changes would you like to see? Or what changes are you working towards, I guess, in the European Parliament at the moment?
Well, I think European policy influences us like every day. Even from when we get up in the morning, which different chemicals are allowed in our makeup or day creams or shampoos. So there's already that. And then, of course, these more well-known aspects like the Erasmus and the different exchange programs and volunteer programs. But also on the broader level, like the decisions we take today, for example, regarding the green transition, is going to have an immensely impact on our lives, just looking 5 or 10 years ahead. So the decisions that we make are very much going to influence the future life of young people.
You mentioned that there are a lot of young people that are very politically engaged, that do care about politics, and maybe the way we talk about the institutions can make it more boring. So how do you feel we can engage young people that are already feeling disillusioned or uninterested in the political process?
It's
definitely a tough question.
Well, I think one big aspect of it is to discuss politics and not processes and institutions. I think that's very important, because if you get the feeling that you need to know these different institutions, what a trialogue is, how this big system works, then I think a lot of people is gonna be like, okay, I don't get any of that. I'm just blocking it out, which is really a shame for democracy and engagement. So having a different kind of discussion on Europe, I think, is important. And then, but it's difficult because I think like a lot of young people feel that like the hope that they had also following the green wave in 2019 hasn't been fulfilled. Like we're not going to reach that many of our climate targets, and there is a lack of trust that politicians are handling what you feel like they should handle. It goes also broader than just the young generation, but of course if you lose the hope of democracy in the young generation, it's really worrying. So
what would your advice be to someone who's considering voting in the next European elections, and for someone who maybe this is the first time engaging in European politics, and they don't know where to start? What would your advice be?
Well, that they should vote, preferably for the Greens. But on a more serious note, I think I would start by figuring out what do I think is important in Europe, like what crisis or solutions do I want, do I care? most about refugee policies, climate, corporations, environment. Like, what is my topic as a citizen and as a young person? And then reading just on that, like, what do the different parties believe about that? And I think also in all the member states, there are going to be debates on European politics.
Yeah.
So you could also go to one of those. But I think it's important that we know that when we go down and put a cross in the ballot, it actually has an impact. Like, the majorities that we have in the European Parliament are sometimes very, very tight. So if you just move 1 or 2 MEPs, it can have a really big influence on the legislation that we make.
Are there any areas that you're working on at the moment that you want people to know about or to consider when they're voting in the next elections? Any topics that you think are very relevant at the moment?
I think there's so many. One thing that I work on very much at the moment is the anti-money laundering legislation. It can sound a bit boring, but it's making sure that when we sanction Russian oligarchs, the sanctions actually have an effect and that they can't just hide their wealth somewhere in Europe. And then I've worked the last 2.5 years on the EU pay transparency legislation that all member states now have to implement, which I think is a quite big step for gender equality in Europe. So those are the things that I've done that I think people haven't realized yet, that I would love them to realize.
Very good. And my last question, very simply, is: are you planning to vote in the next election?
Yes,
Definitely.
I'm planning to vote.